Dawn broke over forward operating base Redstone with a copper light that only desert mornings could produce. Dr. Sarah Chun stood in the aid station conducting her morning inventory, her hands moving through the medical supplies with the precision of someone who had cataloged equipment under far worse conditions. Bandages, tourniquets, morphine auto-injectors, surgical kits. Everything in its place. Everything accounted for. She paused at her medical bag, fingers brushing against something tucked in the interior pocket. A photograph, edges worn soft from years of handling. The image showed 8 figures in tactical gear, faces obscured by balaclavas and shadow, standing before a Black Hawk helicopter. She was the smallest figure in the frame, barely visible between 2 massive operators. That felt like another lifetime, another person entirely. Footsteps echoed on the plywood flooring outside. Chun slid the photograph deeper into the bag and zipped it closed in one fluid motion, turning toward the supply shelf as the door banged open. Sergeant First Class Derek Holloway filled the doorway with the particular authority of a man who had never been questioned in his professional life. His jaw was set, his shoulders squared, and his eyes carried the dismissive assessment he reserved for anyone he deemed beneath his station. 2 soldiers lingered behind him in the morning light, Corporal Diaz and Private Okonkwo, their expressions carefully neutral. "Doc," Holloway announced, "we need those ammunition crates moved to the northern perimeter." His tone made it clear this was not a request. Command wants them repositioned before 0900. Shin glanced at the clock. It was 0547. She had patients scheduled for sick call at 0700. "The crates weigh 60 pounds each," Holloway added with something approaching a smile. "I figured since medics do not do real work anyway, you would have plenty of energy." Diaz shifted his weight uncomfortably. Okonkwo studied the ground. She nodded once. "I will have them moved within the hour." She walked past Holloway toward the supply yard where the ammunition crates waited in neat rows. Each one bore the weight he had described, 60 pounds of brass and steel that would challenge most soldiers to carry any distance. Chun lifted the first crate and settled it against her hip with an ease that should have raised questions. It did not. Holloway had already decided what she was capable of, and evidence to the contrary simply did not register. "Now let me ask you something before we continue. Where are you watching this from right now? And I am curious, have you ever been in a situation where someone dismissed you before they knew what you could actually do? Someone who looked right past you because they had already made up their mind about who you were? Drop your answer in the comments, because this story is about exactly that, and I think you might relate to what happens next. Chun carried the first crate across the compound toward the northern perimeter, her boots finding solid ground on the uneven terrain. Behind her, she could hear Holloway holding court with his soldiers. "You see that," he said, his voice carrying in the morning air. "That is what medics are good for, carrying things and putting on bandages. The military gives them officer ranks as participation trophies." Diaz laughed, though the sound was hollow. Okonkwo said nothing. Chun passed within earshot, her expression unchanged. Her eyes, however, performed a sweep of the northern tree line that had nothing to do with medical training. She noted the sight lines, the dead ground where an approaching force could find cover, the distance to the perimeter wire. Old habits, the kind that never fully disappeared no matter how many years passed or how many times she told herself that chapter was closed. Holloway watched her go, satisfied with his display of dominance. He did not notice the way she had lifted the crate. He did not notice her scanning the terrain. He saw a medic because that was all he had decided to see. The sun climbed higher as Chun made her 4th trip across the compound. Sweat darkened her uniform between her shoulder blades, though her breathing remained even. She was settling the final crate into position when quick footsteps approached from behind. "Dr. Chun," a young voice called out. Chun turned to find Specialist Elena Rivera jogging toward her, the 22-year-old medic trainee who had been assigned to shadow her for the past month. Rivera was earnest in a way that reminded Chun of herself at that age, before Damascus, before Kowalski, before everything changed. "Let me help you with those," Rivera said, reaching for a crate that Chun had already positioned. "They're done," Chun replied. "But thank you." Rivera nodded, falling in a step beside Chun as they walked back toward the aid station. Her eyes dropped to Chen's hands, lingering there for a moment too long. "Dr. Chun," Rivera began, then hesitated. "Yes, your hands. Rivera Yestervagli. The calluses. They are not where they should be. I mean," she corrected quickly, "they are not where mine are. From holding instruments, doing procedures. Yours are different." Chen glanced down at her own palms. The calluses Rivera had noticed were in the webbing between thumb and forefinger, along the pad below the pinky, across the first knuckle of the index finger. They were the calluses of someone who had spent years with a rifle grip pressed against their hands. Not surgical instruments, not medical equipment. She closed her fingers. "Everyone develops them differently," Chun said evenly. "It depends on your grip." Rivera accepted this explanation, though something in her expression suggested she was filing the observation away for later consideration. They walked the rest of the way in comfortable silence, the morning already growing warm around them. In the aid station, Chun began preparing for sick call. Behind her, through the window, she could see Holloway leading his soldiers toward the motor pool, his posture radiating the confidence of a man who had put an inferior in her place. He had no idea. None of them did. And Sarah Chun intended to keep it that way. 2 days passed with the grinding routine that defined life at Forward Operating Base Redstone. Patrols went out. Patrols came back. The sun punished anyone foolish enough to stand in it for too long. Private First Class Donovan learned that lesson the hard way. Chun worked over him in the aid station, her movements efficient as she administered fluids through an 4-line. Donovan had collapsed during a perimeter check, his core temperature dangerously elevated, his skin flushed and dry. Classic heat exhaustion threatening to tip in a heat stroke. She had already packed ice around his neck and groin, was monitoring his vitals with the calm focus of someone who had treated far worse in far more hostile conditions. The door opened and Lieutenant Marcus Webb entered, his young face tight with concern. At 29, Webb carried the burden of command with visible effort, always seeming to second-guess himself even when his instincts were sound. "How is he?" Webb asked, moving to stand beside the treatment table. Chun adjusted the foredrip. "Stable. Another hour of fluids and cooling, and he should be ready for light duty tomorrow. Full recovery within 48 hours. Webb exhaled with relief. "Good. That is good." He watched Chun work for a moment, and something like appreciation flickered across his features. "You handled this quickly." Before Chun could respond, a shadow filled the doorway. Holloway surveyed the scene with the expression of a man observing something beneath his interest. He leaned against the door frame, arms crossed, watching Chun hang a second bag of saline. "Anyone can stick in 4, Holloway announced to no one in particular. "They teach that in basic first aid courses." He shook his head slowly. "We're treating this like brain surgery when it is really just glorified babysitting." Webb's jaw tightened. He glanced at Holloway, then back at Chun, then at the floor. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. 4. Webb said nothing. Chen's fingers paused on the 4-line for just a fraction of a second, the only sign that she had heard. Then she continued her work as if Holloway had not spoken at all. Holloway pushed off from the doorframe. "Let me know when Sleeping Beauty wakes up," he said to Webb, ignoring Chen entirely. "We need him back on the roster." He left without waiting for a response. Webb stood in the uncomfortable aftermath, his hands opening and closing at his sides. He waited until Holloway's footsteps faded before speaking. "Dr. Chun," he began, his voice carrying the weight of something he could not quite articulate. "I apologize for that. Sergeant Holloway can be direct." Chun checked Donovan's pulse. "The patient will be fine, Lieutenant." It was not what Webb had been apologizing for, and they both knew it. He lingered for another moment, caught between the impulse to say more and the awareness that he had already failed to say what mattered. Then he nodded once and followed Holloway out. Chun stood alone with her unconscious patient, the hum of the portable air conditioning unit filling the silence. The evening formation assembled at 1830 hours, 15 soldiers standing in loose ranks as the day's final announcements were delivered. Chen took her position at the back, her uniform still bearing the salt stains of the afternoon's work. Holloway strode before the assembled troops with a clipboard in his hand. "Duty roster updates," he announced. "Latrine sanitation for the next week." He made a show of consulting his clipboard, though the smirk pulling at his mouth suggested he had already memorized this particular assignment. "Dr. Chun." Murmurs rippled through the formation. Latrine duty was rotated among junior enlisted, privates, and specialists who had not yet earned their way past the least desirable tasks. It was never assigned to officers. It was certainly never assigned to medical personnel. Chen's expression did not change. She simply said, "Understood, Sergeant." Holloway's smirk faltered for just a moment, denied the reaction he had been seeking. He recovered quickly, moving on to other announcements, but several soldiers exchanged glances that spoke louder than words. Rivera found Chun behind the supply building after formation, her young face flushed with anger. "That was wrong," Rivera said, her voice trembling with the effort of keeping it controlled. "You are an officer. You are a doctor. He cannot assign you to clean toilets." Chen leaned against the building's corrugated metal wall, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. "He just did, but it is not right." Rivera paced in tight circles. "You should report him. Go to Colonel Hayes. File a formal complaint." "And then what?" Chen asked quietly. Rivera stopped pacing. "And then he gets in trouble. He learns he cannot treat people like this." Chen considered this for a moment. "When you react to someone like Holloway," she said, "you give them exactly what they want. Your anger becomes their power." She pushed off from the wall. "Some battles are worth fighting. Some are not. The skill is knowing which is which." "How do you know?" Rivera demanded. "How do you know which this is?" Chen's gaze drifted to the distant perimeter, where the last light of day painted the wire in shades of gold. "I will know when it matters," she said, and then she walked toward the latrines to begin her assigned duty. The base settled into nighttime quiet by 2300 hours. Generators hummed. Perimeter guards changed shifts. Most soldiers found their racks and surrendered to exhausted sleep. Chun sat alone in the supply yard, a borrowed M4 carbine laid across her knees. She had signed it out from the armory under the pretense of cleaning for inventory, a task no one questioned and no one supervised. Now her hands moved over the weapon with a fluency that spoke of 10,000 repetitions. Muscle memory so deeply ingrained it required no conscious thought. The magazine released with a click. The charging handle drew back. The bolt carrier group slid free. The firing pin, the cam pin, the bolt itself. Each component separated from the whole and laid in precise order on the crate beside her. 23 seconds from complete weapon to field-stripped components. Chen sat motionless for a moment, studying the disassembled rifle in the dim light. Then her hands began the reverse process, each piece finding its home with mechanical precision, the weapon reassembling itself under her fingers like a puzzle, solving itself. 17 seconds from components to functional weapon. She pulled the charging handle, checked the chamber, ensured the safety was engaged. The rifle was ready to fire. Not that she intended to fire it. Not tonight. Probably not ever again, if she had any say in the matter. But some skills could not be unlearned. Some instincts could not be buried deep enough. And on nights like this, when men like Holloway reminded her of all the reasons she had walked away from her former life, Chen found a strange comfort in knowing that the warrior still lived somewhere beneath the healer's hands. She field-stripped the weapon again, reassembled it again, faster each time. The moon rose over forward operating base Redstone, and Sarah Chun sat alone with her secrets, preparing for a fight she hoped would never come. Colonel Patricia Hayes had commanded forward operating base Redstone for 11 months, long enough to recognize trouble in its earliest forms. The intelligence report glowing on her screen represented exactly that kind of trouble. She scrolled through the satellite imagery and signal intercepts, her weathered face illuminated by the monitor's pale light. Enemy movement had increased significantly within a 15-kilometer radius over the past 72 hours. Small groups converging from multiple directions. Communications chatter spiking in patterns that suggested coordination. The analysts at Regional Command had flagged it as concerning but not critical. Hayes trusted analysts. She also trusted her instincts. And her instincts said this was more than routine activity. She typed a command that elevated Redstone to heightened alert status, then turned to her aide, Captain Morrison, who waited near the door. "What else requires my attention today?" Hayes asked. Morrison consulted his tablet. Standard personnel metteurs, colonel. Supply requisition approvals, leave requests, and there's a note about some friction in Lieutenant Webb's platoon. Hayes's fingers paused over a keyboard. Friction involving whom? Morrison scrolled through the report. Sergeant First Class Holloway and one of the medical officers. Dr. Chun, apparently there have been some issues with duty assignments and professional conduct. Describe these issues. Morrison shifted his weight. The report mentions that Dr. Chun was assigned to latrine sanitation duty at the last formation. Several soldiers noted it was unusual for an officer and medical professional. Hayes absorbed this information without visible reaction. "Thank you, Captain. That will be all." Morrison departed, and Hayes sat alone in the command center's fluorescent hum. She rose from her desk and moved to the secure filing cabinet in the corner, entering her command code on the electronic lock. The drawer slid open to reveal personnel files arranged in alphabetical order. She pulled Chen's file. The surface documentation told a straightforward story. Medical degree from Johns Hopkins. Residency in emergency medicine. Military service beginning 8 years ago. Competent evaluations, professional conduct, nothing remarkable in either direction. Hayes flipped past the standard paperwork to the sealed addendum at the back. The folder bore the insignia of Joint Special Operations Command and a classification level that most officers at Redstone would never encounter. She broke the seal and began to read. The file documented 11 years of service that did not officially exist. Delta Force selection at age 24, one of only 3 women to complete the program in its history. 47 confirmed kills across operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and locations that remained redacted even at her clearance level. 3 Bronze Stars, 1 Silver Star, a Distinguished Service Cross for an operation in Mosul that had eliminated a high-value target responsible for 17 American deaths. Hayes turned to the final pages. The Damascus incident was heavily redacted, but the broad strokes emerged through the black bars. A mission compromised. A team member killed. Master Sergeant Sarah Chun requesting immediate transfer to non-combat duties. Psychological evaluation recommending approval. Reassignment to the Medical Corps granted. Hayes closed the file and returned it to the cabinet. She had known about Chen's background when she accepted the transfer. JSOC Command had asked her to provide a quiet posting for one of their best operators, someone who needed distance from the life but could not be allowed to disappear entirely. Hayes had agreed as a favor to colleagues she respected. She had not anticipated that someone like Holloway would make Chen's transition more difficult than it needed to be. The morning briefing convened at 0800 hours in the plywood structure that served as Redstone's Tactical Operations Center. Lieutenant Webb stood before the assembled platoon, a map projected on the screen behind him. "Patrol schedules for the next 72 hours, Webb announced. "First Squad takes the northern sector starting tomorrow at 0600. Second Squad rotates to the eastern perimeter." Chen sat in the back row beside Rivera, her notebook open, her pen moving in small notations that no one bothered to observe. Holloway raised his hand without waiting to be acknowledged. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice carrying the tone of someone offering helpful advice. "Regarding Dr. Chen's assignment to the patrol roster." He paused for effect. "I would recommend she remain on base for medical station coverage. We will be moving fast out there, and we cannot afford to slow down protecting someone who is not trained for combat operations." The room went quiet. Several soldiers glanced toward Chun, who sat motionless. Webb hesitated. His eyes moved from Holloway to Chun to the map behind him. The silence stretched. "That is a reasonable suggestion," Webb finally said. "Dr. Chun, You will maintain station coverage during the patrol rotation. Chen nodded once. Understood, Lieutenant. Rivera's hands clenched in her lap. Beside her, she noticed Chen's fingers curl slightly against the notebook, the only sign of any reaction at all. Then the fingers relaxed, and Chen resumed her notes as if nothing had happened. The briefing concluded 10 minutes later, soldiers filing out toward their various duties. Chen remained seated, her attention fixed on the situation map that dominated the front wall. She waited until the room emptied, then approached the map alone. Her eyes traced the terrain features, the elevation contours, the marked patrol routes. 3 minutes of study revealed what the tactical officers had missed. The eastern approach offered dead ground within 400 meters of the perimeter wire, invisible from the guard towers. The northern sector had a drainage culvert that could shelter a squad-sized element. The western ridge provided overwatch positions that were not covered by any patrol route. The motor pool created a blind spot in the southern field of fire. For vulnerabilities, 4 ways an attacking force could breach Redstone's defenses. Chen committed them to memory. She did not report them. Reporting would raise questions she had no intention of answering. That night, she sat on her bunk with a worn journal open across her knees. The pages held years of entries in her small, precise handwriting. She wrote about the briefing, about Holloway, about the vulnerabilities in the base's defenses that she had identified and chosen to ignore. Then her pen slowed, and she wrote about something else entirely. I thought I could leave it behind. The training, the instincts, the way my mind automatically calculates fields of fire and approach vectors. 3 years since Damascus, and I still see every room as a potential ambush site. I still count exits. I still wake at sounds that others sleep through. Kowalski would laugh at me. He always said the skills do not leave, they just wait. He was right about most things. He was wrong about that alley in Damascus, but he was right about this. I swore I would never fire another shot. I meant it when I said it. I still mean it now. But some promises are easier to make than to keep. Chen closed the journal and stared at the ceiling of her quarters, listening to the distant hum of generators and the footsteps of perimeter guards. Somewhere beyond the wire, enemy forces were gathering. Somewhere inside the wire, a sergeant continued to underestimate her. She did not know which threat would prove more significant. She suspected she would find out soon. Morning physical training began at 0530. The desert air, still cool enough to make exertion tolerable. The obstacle course stretched across the northern training ground, a brutal sequence of walls, ropes, trenches, and cargo nets that separated soldiers who trained from soldiers who merely exercised. Rivera stood near the timing station, watching the morning's participants attack the course in pairs. She had already completed her run, posting a respectable time that placed her in the middle of the pack. Now she waited for her mentor, curious to see how a medical officer would perform on equipment designed to break infantry soldiers. Chen approached the starting line in her physical training uniform, her expression carrying the same unreadable calm she brought to everything. Holloway stood nearby with his arms crossed, having positioned himself specifically to witness what he clearly expected to be an embarrassing performance. Go, the timekeeper called. Chen moved. Rivera's breath caught in her throat. She had seen soldiers run this course for months. She had never seen anyone move like this. Chen flowed over the first wall like water, finding its path downhill, her body already rotating toward the rope climb before her feet touched ground. The rope disappeared beneath her hands in seconds. The cargo net became a blur of efficient motion. The trenches, the hurdles, the final sprint. Chen crossed the finish line, and the timekeeper announced the result. For minutes, 18 seconds. Silence fell over the training ground. That time would qualify for special operations selection. That time would place in the top percentile of any combat unit in the military. That time did not belong to a medic. Holloway's face cycled through confusion, denial, and finally settled on suspicion. He strode to the timing station and examined the stopwatch. Malfunction, he announced loudly. The timer is broken. He turned to Chen with a smile that contained no warmth. Run it again. Document. Let us get an accurate reading this time. Chen wiped sweat from her forehead. Of course, Sergeant. She returned to the starting line. Rivera watched her mentor take a breath, watched something shift almost imperceptibly in her posture. When the timekeeper called go, Chen moved again. This time she stumbled slightly on the first wall. Her rope climb showed visible effort. The cargo net slowed her down. She crossed the finish line, breathing hard. Her time announced as 6 minutes, 42 seconds. Average. Unremarkable. Exactly what a medical officer should produce. Holloway's smirk returned. That is more like it, he said, and walked away satisfied. Rivera stood frozen at the timing station. She had seen both runs. She knew what she had witnessed. The first time had been real. The second time had been a performance. The question was why Dr. Chun felt the need to hide what she could do. Captain David Torres arrived at Forward Operating Base Redstone shortly before noon, his helicopter touching down in a cloud of dust that coated everything within 50 meters. At 36, Torres had spent a decade conducting after-action reviews for operations across 3 continents. His eye for detail had become legendary among the units he assessed. He was here for routine purposes, a scheduled review of a patrol engagement from the previous month. Nothing suggested this visit would be memorable. The dining facility was half full when Torres entered for lunch. Soldiers clustered at tables in the informal hierarchy that governed military meals. He collected his tray and scanned for an empty seat, his gaze passing over faces without particular interest. Then he noticed the woman sitting alone near the emergency exit. She was a medical officer based on her insignia, eating with the efficient motions of someone who treated meals as fuel rather than pleasure. But Torres found himself watching the way her eyes moved. Every 30 seconds, her gaze swept the room's exits. She counted personnel entering and leaving. Her seat position gave her a clear line to the door with her back protected by the wall. Torres had spent years working alongside Special Operations Forces. He recognized the behavior pattern immediately. He collected his utensils and approached her table. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. The woman looked up, assessed him in a single glance, and nodded. "Help yourself, Captain." Torres sat across from her and extended his hand. "David Torres, here for the after-action review on last month's patrol contact." "Sarah Chun," she replied, shaking his hand. "Medical officer." They ate in comfortable silence for several minutes. Torres noticed that Chen's situational awareness never dropped, even as she appeared focused on her meal. Whoever she was, wherever she had come from, the habits of a combat operator did not simply disappear because someone put on a different uniform. The afternoon brought clouds that threatened rain without delivering it. Chun crossed the supply yard with her medical bag over one shoulder, heading toward the aid station to restock after a morning of sick call appointments. She did not see Holloway until he was already beside her. His shoulder caught her medical bag with enough force to knock it from her grip. The bag hit the muddy ground and burst open, scattering supplies across the dirt. Bandages rolled through puddles. Instrument cases cracked against rocks. A metal object bounced twice and landed face down in the mud. Chun dropped to her knees immediately, gathering equipment with quick hands. Holloway stood over her, his expression painted with false concern. "Clumsy," he observed. "You should watch where you are walking, document." He walked away laughing. His soldiers Diaz and Okonkwo followed, though neither joined in the laughter. Chun continued collecting her supplies, her movements betraying no anger. Her fingers found a metal object in the mud and closed around it before anyone could see. A challenge coin, its face bearing the insignia of Joint Special Operations Command. She palmed it smoothly and slipped it into her pocket. Across the yard, Torres lowered the clipboard he had been pretending to study. He had witnessed the end of the encounter from 50 meters away. Now he approached, his expression neutral. "Dr. Chun," he said, "can I help you clean those?" Chun stood, mud staining her uniform. "No thank you, Captain. Everything is accounted for." Torres noted her breathing, slow and controlled. He noted the deliberate way she relaxed her shoulders, a technique taught in stress inoculation courses for high-risk operators. He noted the complete absence of visible anger at what had clearly been intentional harassment. "That was quite a fall," he said carefully. "Where did you train, if you do not mind my asking?" She met his eyes. "Fort Sam Houston," she said. "The Army Medical Department Center." It was the correct answer. It was also incomplete in ways that Torres could not quite articulate. Her eyes told him she knew he was probing. They also told him she had no intention of revealing anything more. The evening intelligence briefing brought news that transformed the base's atmosphere. Enemy forces confirmed massing within assault range. Estimated strength between 60 and 80 fighters. Probable attack window within 72 hours. Colonel Hayes ordered increased perimeter patrols and weapons readiness checks. The announcement sent soldiers scrambling toward the armory, toward defensive positions, toward the grim preparations that preceded expected combat. Holloway stood at the center of the activity, directing his squad with loud authority. When medics should stay in the aid station where they belong during any fighting, he announced to anyone within earshot, "We do not need medical personnel getting in the way of actual soldiers." Chen happened to be passing within range of his voice. She paused, turned, and spoke clearly enough for surrounding soldiers to hear. "Of course, Sergeant," she said, "when you're wounded, would you prefer treatment in the field or evacuation back to base? I want to ensure I am out of your way while you bleed." Laughter rippled through the gathered soldiers before they could suppress it. Holloway's face flushed red, his mouth opening and closing without producing words. Chen walked on without waiting for a response. Behind her, for the first time since she had arrived at Forward Operating Base Redstone, the balance of power had shifted by the smallest degree. Torres watched from across the compound, adding another observation to his growing collection of questions about the base's medical officer. The first mortar round struck the northern perimeter at 0347 hours. Chun was awake before the explosion's echo faded, her body rolling from the bunk and finding the floor in a single motion that bypassed conscious thought entirely. 11 years of training did not ask permission. It simply acted. Alarms shrieked across Forward Operating Base Redstone as the second and third rounds impacted in rapid succession. Chen pulled on her boots, grabbed her medical bag, and sprinted toward the aid station through darkness split by muzzle flashes and the orange glow of fires. Radio chatter filled the night with fragments of chaos. Contact north. Contact east. Multiple breach points. They are inside the wire. Lieutenant Webb scrambled from the command post, weapon in hand, shouting orders that dissolved into the cacophony. He ran toward the northern perimeter where tracer rounds stitched bright lines across the sky. Behind him, soldiers poured from their quarters in various states of readiness, some still pulling on body armor as they moved. Chen reached the aid station as the first casualty arrived. Specialist Morrison, the same soldier she had treated for heat exhaustion days earlier, now lay on a stretcher with shrapnel wounds across his torso and legs. 2 soldiers had carried him in, their faces pale with shock. She worked without speaking, her hands finding wounds and applying pressure, tourniquets appearing where they were needed, morphine administered with precise dosage. Morrison's bleeding slowed, his vitals stabilized. Chen moved him to the recovery area and turned to face the door, knowing more would come. They did. Rivera burst through the entrance, her uniform dark with someone else's blood. "Dr. Chun," she gasped, "they're inside the perimeter. Eastern sector. They killed the guards at checkpoint 4. Chun processed this information in the span of a heartbeat. The eastern sector, the approach she had identified days ago, the dead ground that offered cover to within 400 meters of the wire. Someone had known exactly where to strike. Through the aid station window, she could see muzzle flashes moving closer. Not the disciplined fire of American soldiers defending their positions. The scattered, aggressive fire of attackers advancing through a breach. "How many?" Chen asked. Rivera shook her head. "I do not know. A lot. Sergeant Holloway took his squad to reinforce, but the radio says they are pinned down." As if summoned by his name, Holloway's voice crackled over the tactical frequency that played from the aid station's radio. "This is Holloway. Eastern Breach. We're taking heavy fire. 3 men down. Request immediate reinforcement. His voice cracked with something that might have been fear. We are being overrun. Chun looked at Rivera. Stay with the patients. What are you going to do? Rivera asked. Chun did not answer. She moved to the window and assessed the tactical situation with eyes that had done this calculation hundreds of times before. 15 hostiles visible, moving in fire teams toward the aid station. 2 military police officers had taken cover behind sandbags near the entrance, returning fire with their sidearms. As Chun watched, both MPs fell within seconds of each other. Professional shots. Center mass. The attackers knew what they were doing. The path to the aid station lay open. Chun looked at her medical bag. She looked at the wounded soldiers behind her. She looked at Rivera, young and terrified and counting on her. She thought of Kowalski. She thought of Damascus. She thought of the promise she had made to herself 3 years ago, kneeling in blood and sand, swearing she would never take another life. Some promises were easier to make than to keep. Chun walked to the fallen MP nearest the door. She knelt beside him, checked for a pulse she knew she would not find, and lifted his M4 carbine from the ground. The weapon settled into her hands like a missing part of her body, returning home. She chambered around and stepped outside. The first hostile was 40 meters away, advancing toward the aid station with his weapon raised. Chin's shot took him center mass before he registered her presence. He dropped without a sound. The second hostile appeared from behind a generator, already turning toward the source of the gunfire. 2 rounds. Down. Third and fourth came together, moving as a team. Chun engaged them both before they could find cover. Both fell. Rivera watched through the window, her hands pressed against the glass. The woman she saw bore no resemblance to the calm medic who had mentored her for weeks. This woman moved like death itself given human form, flowing between cover positions, weapon rising and falling with mechanical precision, each trigger pull answered by another body hitting the ground. Chun advanced toward the eastern breach. Her movement patterns were textbook special operations, angles and cover and controlled aggression. 9 hostiles down in the first 90 seconds. She reloaded without breaking stride. The magazine change, taking less than 2 seconds. The defenders at the eastern perimeter heard the gunfire shift direction. They heard the enemy's coordinated advance dissolve into confusion. They heard shots coming from behind the attacking force, methodical and precise, each one followed by a scream or the heavy sound of a body falling. Holloway pressed himself against a concrete barrier, his weapon empty, 2 of his soldiers bleeding beside him. The hostiles who had pinned his squad were no longer focused on his position. They were turning, trying to identify the new threat, dying before they could find it. Through the smoke and darkness, Holloway saw a figure emerge. Small, deliberate, moving with a fluid grace that belonged on no battlefield he had ever seen. The figure raised a rifle and eliminated the hostile who had been about to flank Holloway's position. Then another, then a third. Holloway's mind refused to process what his eyes were reporting. The figure advanced until it stood over him, weapon still raised, scanning for additional threats. Sergeant, Chun said, her voice carrying no emotion at all. Get your wounded to the aid station. I will handle this. She moved past him before he could respond, disappearing into the chaos of the eastern sector, hunting the remaining attackers with the patience of someone who had done this more times than she cared to remember. Holloway stared after her, his mouth open, his understanding of reality fundamentally altered. The medic he had mocked and belittled and assigned to clean toilets. She had just saved his life without breaking stride. Chun moved through the eastern sector with the cold efficiency of a scalpel cutting away infection. The chaos of battle simplified itself in her mind to a series of geometry problems. Angles, distances, threat vectors, solutions. For hostiles had established flanking positions behind a row of supply containers, pouring fire into the remnants of Holloway's pinned squad. Chun approached from their blind side, using the smoke and confusion as concealment. The first 2 never saw her. The third turned at the sound of his companions falling and caught a round before his weapon could rise. The fourth tried to run. He made it 6 steps. Chun cleared the area and moved to the next threat concentration. Her rifle was an extension of her body, rising and falling with each engagement, the trigger pull as natural as breathing. Somewhere beneath the cold focus of combat, a part of her registered what she was doing. 17 years of distance from her first confirmed kill, and the mechanics had not changed at all. Neither had the cost, but that accounting would come later. Lieutenant Webb led his reinforcement element into the eastern sector at 0408 hours, expecting to find a desperate firefight. Instead, he found silence broken only by distant gunfire from the northern perimeter. Bodies lay scattered across the ground in a pattern that told its own story. They formed a trail leading from the aid station toward the breach point, each one dropped with surgical precision. Webb followed the trail with growing disbelief, counting as he moved. He found Chun behind a disabled transport vehicle, engaging 3 hostiles who had taken cover in a drainage ditch. Her movements were textbook, the kind of room-clearing technique that took years to master. She eliminated all 3 targets in under 4 seconds, then swept the vehicle interior with her weapon raised before lowering it. Webb had witnessed this level of skill exactly twice in his career. Both times had been during joint exercises with Delta Force operators. "Dr. Chun," he said, his voice uncertain. Chun turned. Her face was blank, her breathing controlled, her weapon still at the ready position. "Lieutenant," she said, "the eastern breach is contained. Northern sector may still need support." She walked past him toward the next sound of gunfire. Leaving Webb standing among the bodies of enemies she had killed with the casual competence of someone performing routine maintenance. The attack ended at 0412 hours, 25 minutes after the first mortar round struck. The gunfire tapered from a roar to sporadic exchanges to silence. Flares arced over the perimeter, illuminating a landscape of destruction and victory. Chun walked back toward the aid station through the aftermath. Her rifle remained raised, her eyes still scanning for threats that no longer existed. The transition from combat to calm was not a switch that flipped instantly. It was a gradual descent, a slow return from the place where killing became as simple as diagnosis. She passed Holloway near the motor pool. He was helping carry a wounded soldier on a stretcher, his uniform dark with blood that was not his own. Their eyes met across the distance. Holloway looked away first. Chun did not acknowledge the moment. Her mind had already moved forward to the next patient, the next wound, the next life that needed saving rather than ending. She entered the aid station and set the rifle against the wall, her hands finding their way back to bandages and sutures with the same precision they had applied to trigger and sight. Rivera stood in the corner, trembling, not from fear of the attack. She had been afraid during the assault, certainly, but that fear had passed. What remained was something different, something closer to awe. "Dr. Chun," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Chun was already working on a soldier with a chest wound, her bloody hands moving with steady purpose. "Yes, specialist. Who are you?" "Really?" Chun did not look up. "I am a medic." Rivera stepped closer. "Medics do not shoot like that. Medics do not move like that. I watched you kill more enemies in 4 minutes than the rest of the base combined." Chun's hands paused on the wound. For a moment, the aid station existed in perfect silence. "I was not always a medic," Chun said quietly. She resumed her work without further explanation, and Rivera understood that she had just heard as much truth as she would ever receive. Dawn broke over forward operating base Redstone with the same copper light that had greeted the day before, though everything beneath that light had changed. The casualty count finalized by 0600 hours. 3 American soldiers killed in action. 14 wounded, none critically. The names of the dead would be sent home to families who would never fully understand the circumstances of their loss. The enemy had fared worse. 42 fighters killed across the base, their assault broken against defenses that should have been overwhelmed. The intelligence estimates had predicted 60 to 80 attackers. The survivors had fled into the desert before sunrise, leaving their dead behind. Captain Torres walked the eastern sector as the sun climbed higher, documenting the aftermath for his review. He counted bodies. He noted positions. He traced the path of engagement from the aid station to the breach point and back. 17 bodies lay along that path. 17 enemies killed by a single shooter who had emerged from the medical station and systematically eliminated every threat between herself and Holloway's pin squad. The groupings on the bodies were tight. Center mass. Professional. Torres had seen enough special operations engagements to recognize the signature. Whoever had made this walk had done it many times before. He already knew who that person was. The obstacle course. The situational awareness. The calluses on her hands. The way she had handled Holloway's harassment with the patience of someone who had endured far worse. Dr. Sarah Chun, medical officer, formerly something else entirely. Torres closed his notebook and walked toward the command post. Colonel Hayes would want a full briefing, and he suspected she would have answers to questions he had not yet thought to ask. Behind him, the morning work crews began collecting the enemy dead. 17 bodies from the eastern path. 17 confirmations of what Dr. Chun had done. No one spoke about it openly. Everyone knew. Captain Torres began his after-action review at 0800 hours, setting up in a small office adjacent to the command post. Standard procedure following any significant engagement. Document the timeline. Record individual accounts. Identify lessons learned. Recommend improvements. He had conducted dozens of these reviews across his career. None had produced interview notes like these. Private Okonkwo sat across from him, still wearing the hollow expression of a soldier processing his first real combat. Torres guided him through the standard questions. Timeline of initial contact. Position during the engagement. Actions taken. Observations of enemy and friendly forces. Okonkwo answered each question methodically until Torres asked about the eastern sector. The medic, Okonkwo said, his voice dropping. Dr. Chun. She came out of nowhere. I saw her drop 4 of them before I even understood what was happening. His hands trembled slightly. I have never seen anyone shoot like that. Not in training. Not in combat. Never. Torres made a note and moved to the next interview. Corporal Diaz told the same story from a different angle. He had been 30 meters from Chen's position when she engaged the first hostile. He described her movement, her weapon handling, her target transitions. He used words like surgical and mechanical and impossible. Private First Class Morrison, still recovering from his shrapnel wounds, spoke from his bed in the aid station. He had watched through the window as Chun transformed from the doctor, treating his injuries into something else entirely. She saved my life twice that night, Morrison said, once with bandages, once with bullets. Torres filled page after page with testimony that pointed to the same conclusion. The Eastern Sector defense had hinged on a single individual, a medical officer who fought like a special operations veteran because Torres increasingly suspected she was one. The security office contained recording equipment that monitored key positions across the base. Torres requested access to footage from the Eastern Sector cameras, and the sergeant on duty provided it without question. He sat alone in the dim room, watching the screens cycle through different angles. The timestamp showed 0351 hours when Chun first appeared on camera, emerging from the aid station with a rifle that did not belong to her. Torres leaned forward. The footage quality was grainy, degraded by darkness and smoke, but clear enough to document what happened next. Chun moved across the compound in a combat glide that spoke of thousands of hours of training. She engaged targets with economy of motion that bordered on artistic. One shot, one kill, repeated 17 times in 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Torres paused the footage repeatedly, analyzing her technique. The way she used cover, the angles she chose, the speed of her target transitions. Everything matched the movement patterns taught at the most elite military training facilities in the world. He watched the footage 3 times. By the end, he had stopped taking notes. The evidence spoke for itself. This was not a medic who had gotten lucky. This was an operator who had chosen to become medic. Colonel Hayes looked up from her desk as Torres entered the command office. Her expression suggested she had been expecting this visit. Colonel, Torres began, I need to request Dr. Chen's complete personnel file for the after-action documentation. Her actions during the engagement were significant and require thorough recording. Hayes studied him for a long moment. Define significant, Captain. Torres chose his words carefully. She eliminated 17 enemy combatants in under 4 minutes. Her tactical proficiency exceeds anything I have observed outside of special operations units. The eastern sector would have been overrun without her intervention. Hayes leaned back in her chair. And you believe her standard personnel file will not adequately explain these observations? I believe there is more to Dr. Chun than her current assignment suggests, Colonel. Silence stretched between them. Hayes seemed to be weighing options, calculating outcomes. The complete file requires authorization from Joint Special Operations Command, she said finally. Submit your request through proper channels, and I will ensure it receives appropriate attention. Torres felt the confirmation beneath her careful phrasing. There's a JSOC file, he said. It was not quite a question. Hayes did not answer directly. Submit your request, Captain. You will receive whatever information is deemed necessary for your review. The secure communications room occupied a reinforced section of the command post, shielded from electronic surveillance and accessible only to senior officers. Hayes sat before the encrypted terminal, composing a message to contacts she had hoped would not need to hear from her. General Hawkins responded within minutes, his face appearing on the secure video link with the tired eyes of a man accustomed to calls at odd hours. Patricia, he said, I assume this concerns Master Sergeant Chun. Hayes nodded. Her cover is effectively compromised. The after-action review will document her actions in detail. Questions are already being asked. Hawkins absorbed this without visible reaction. How did she perform? 17 confirmed kills in under 4 minutes. Textbook special operations engagement. She saved the eastern sector single-handedly. A ghost of a smile crossed Hawkins's face. That sounds like Mad Dog. The nickname landed in the silence between them. Hayes had seen it in Chin's classified file, but had never heard it spoken aloud. What are options? Hayes asked. Hawkins considered. We could offer to bring her back. Her skills clearly have not degraded. Delta would welcome her return. And if she declines, then we support whatever choice she makes. Hawkins leaned closer to the camera. Sarah Chun gave us 11 years and 47 confirmed kills. She earned the right to decide her own future. Ask her what she wants, Patricia. Whatever she answers, we will make it work. The connection ended, and Hayes sat alone with the weight of a conversation she had not yet had. Torres found Holloway in the motor pool, supervising repairs on a vehicle damaged during the attack. The sergeant's posture stiffened when he saw the captain approaching with his notebook. Sergeant Holloway, Torres said, I need to complete your interview regarding the Eastern Sector engagement. Holloway wiped grease from his hands. I already gave my statement. I have follow-up questions. Torres consulted his notes. Your initial statement credited supporting elements for eliminating the hostile force that had your squad pinned. Can you be more specific about these supporting elements? Holloway's jaw tightened. It was chaotic, Captain. Darkness, smoke, gunfire from multiple directions. Hard to identify specific individuals. Torres waited. I saw someone engaging the enemy from behind their positions. Holloway continued reluctantly. I cannot identify who it was at the time. Other witnesses have identified Dr. Chun as the individual who eliminated the threats to your position. Torres watched Holloway's face carefully. Do you dispute their accounts? Holloway stared at the damaged vehicle for a long moment. No, he said quietly. I do not dispute them. Torres made a final note in his file. The sergeant who had spent weeks belittling the medic could not bring himself to credit her with saving his life. Some truths, it seemed, were harder to speak than others. Rivera could not sleep. She lay in her bunk staring at the plywood ceiling, her mind cycling through images that refused to fade. Dr. Chun stepping out of the aid station with a rifle. Dr. Chun moving through the compound like a ghost made of violence. Dr. Chun dropping enemies with shots so precise they seemed choreographed. The woman Rivera had shadowed for weeks, learning wound care and triage protocols, had transformed into something unrecognizable in the span of a heartbeat. And now Rivera needed to understand how both versions could exist in the same person. She sat up in the darkness and reached for the small notebook she kept beside her bunk. By the dim glow of a flashlight, she began writing down everything she had observed since arriving at Forward Operating Base Redstone. The calluses on Chen's hands. Wrong placement for a surgeon or medic. Right placement for someone who spent years gripping a rifle. The obstacle course time. 4 minutes 18 seconds. Then a deliberate second run at 6:42. Fast enough for special operations, then slow enough to avoid questions. The Wei Chun scanned rooms, counting exits, assessing threats, positioning herself with her back to walls. Habits that serve no purpose for a medical officer. The weapons cleaning in the supply yard. Field stripping an M4 in 23 seconds, reassembling in 17. Rivera had timed it without Chen knowing. Those speeds exceeded what most infantry soldiers could achieve. The reaction to Holloway's harassment. Not fear, not anger, just patient observation. The calm of someone who had faced far worse and knew this particular threat was manageable. Each observation meant little in isolation. Together, they formed a picture that Rivera was only now allowing herself to see. The communications tent offered limited internet access for personal use, bandwidth restricted and monitored but functional. Rivera sat at one of the terminals the following afternoon, typing search queries with fingers that trembled slightly. Special Operations Selection Criteria. Physical fitness standards for elite military units. Delta Force requirements. The results populated her screen with information that felt like puzzle pieces clicking into place. Psychological profiles emphasizing calm under pressure. Marksmanship standards requiring surgical precision at extended ranges. Selection rates below 5%. Operational histories that remained classified for decades. She found an article describing Delta Force operators as quiet professionals, individuals who avoided attention and blended into conventional units when necessary. The article mentioned that many operators eventually transitioned to support roles, their skills too valuable to lose entirely, but their tolerance for direct action depleted. Rivera read the description 3 times. It matched Dr. Chen perfectly. She closed the browser and walked toward the aid station, carrying questions she was not sure she had the right to ask. Chen stood at the supply cabinet when Rivera entered, organizing bandages with the same methodical precision she applied to everything. The afternoon light fell through the window at an angle that highlighted the lines around her eyes, the subtle evidence of years spent in conditions that age people faster than normal. Dr. Chen, Rivera said, "Can we talk?" Chen did not turn around. Of course. Rivera closed the door behind her. The aid station felt smaller than usual, the air heavy with things unspoken. "I did some research," Rivera began. "After the attack, I looked up information about special operations units, selection criteria, physical standards, operational profiles." Chen's hands paused on a roll of gauze. She resumed, organizing without comment. "The descriptions match you exactly," Rivera continued. "The marksmanship, the movement patterns, the psychological profile, all of it." She took a breath. "You were Delta Force, were you not?" The silence stretched for 5 heartbeats. 10. Chen set down the gauze and turned to face her trainee. "What do you want, specialist?" The question carried no hostility, only tired resignation. Rivera recognized it as the voice of someone who had answered similar questions before and found the conversations exhausting. "I want to understand," Rivera said, "why someone with your abilities would choose to become a medic. Why you let Sergeant Holloway treat you the way he did when you could have shut him down in 100 different ways. Why you hid what you were." Chun leaned against the supply cabinet, her arms crossed loosely over her chest. "Have you ever taken a life, specialist?" Rivera shook her head. "No." Chun nodded slowly. "There's a cost. Every time. Some people describe it as a weight you carry, but that is not quite right. It is more like a debt. Each life you take adds to what you owe." She looked toward the window, her eyes finding something in the middle distance. "I spent 11 years accumulating that debt. 47 confirmed kills across 4 countries. And those are just the ones that made it into official reports. By the end, the balance sheet had become unsustainable. I could not sleep without seeing their faces. I could not function without medication. I was becoming someone I did not recognize. Her voice remained steady, clinical almost, as if she were describing a patient's symptoms rather than her own history. So I made a choice. I decided to spend whatever years I have left putting people back together instead of taking them apart. Medicine instead of marksmanship. Healing instead of killing. It does not erase the debt, but it changes the terms. Rivera absorbed this in silence. The explanation made sense in a way that felt incomplete. But the attack, she said finally. 17 more. Was that not adding to what you owe? Chen's hands found the bandage roll again, her fingers tracing its edges without purpose. Some debts are worth paying. She set the bandages aside and walked toward the door. Rivera understood that the conversation had reached its end. She had received more truth than Chen shared with most people, and pushing further would yield nothing but walls. Dr. Chen, Rivera said as her mentor reached the threshold. Chen paused without turning. Thank you for telling me, and for what you did during the attack. Chen stood motionless for a moment. Then she stepped outside into the afternoon sun, leaving Rivera alone with the weight of secrets that now belonged to both of them. Through the window, Rivera watched her mentor walk toward the perimeter where the fighting had been fiercest. Chen stopped at the spot where the trail of bodies had begun, her silhouette small against the vastness of the desert. She stood there for a long time, alone with whatever calculations were running through her mind. The debt she had accumulated, the debt she had paid, the balance that would never quite reach zero. Rivera turned away from the window and began organizing the supplies her mentor had left unfinished. Some questions had answers. Some answers only led to deeper questions. And some people carried weights that no amount of understanding could lift. The authorization arrived at 0900 hours, transmitted through encrypted channels that bore the digital signature of Joint Special Operations Command. Torres read the confirmation twice before walking to Colonel Hayes' office. She was waiting for him. Close the door, Captain, Hayes said. Torres complied and took the seat she indicated across from her desk. A folder lay between them, thicker than the standard personnel file he had reviewed days earlier. The JSOC insignia on its cover confirmed what he had suspected. Hayes slid the folder across the desk. This is what you requested. Read it here. It does not leave this room. Torres opened the file and began reading. The first pages documented a career that existed in shadows. Master Sergeant Sarah Chun, recruited to Delta Force at age 24 after completing selection with scores that placed her in the top 3% of all candidates. One of only 3 women in the unit's history to earn the distinction. He turned pages and found operational summaries spanning 11 years. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, locations that remained blacked out even at his clearance level. 47 confirmed kills, each one documented with clinical precision. Target identification, distance, conditions, outcome. The commendations followed. 3 bronze stars for valor under fire. 1 silver star for an extraction operation in Kandahar that saved 6 American lives. A distinguished service cross for Mosul, where Chun had eliminated a high-value target responsible for 17 American deaths, operating alone for 36 hours behind enemy lines. Torres reached the final section. Damascus. Most of the text was redacted, black bars covering details that remained classified beyond his access. But the broad narrative emerged through the gaps. A mission compromised by intelligence failure. A team ambushed in hostile territory. Sergeant First Class Michael Kowalski killed in action. Master Sergeant Chun requesting immediate transfer to non-combat assignment. Psychological evaluation recommending approval. Reassignment to Army Medical Corps granted. Torres closed the file. This explains everything, he said. Hayes shook her head slowly. It explains her skills, Captain. It does not explain the woman. Torres considered this distinction. The file documented what Chen could do. It said nothing about why she had chosen to stop doing it, or why she had endured Holloway's harassment without response when she possessed the capability to end it in countless ways. Why would someone with this background allow herself to be treated the way Holloway treated her? Torres asked. Hayes leaned back in her chair. That is the question worth asking. Perhaps some people are done fighting unnecessary battles. Perhaps she had nothing left to prove to men like Holloway. Perhaps she simply wanted to be someone different than the person in that file. Torres nodded slowly. The explanation felt incomplete, but true. How should the after-action review handle her identity? He asked. Hayes was quiet for a moment. The official record will credit responding personnel for the Eastern Sector defense, sufficient to document the outcome without revealing classified information. She met his eyes. The classified record will document everything. Her actions will be recognized through appropriate channels. Torres understood. Two versions of the truth. One for public record, one for those with clearance to know. It was how the special operations community had always functioned. He left the file on Hayes's desk and walked out into the morning sun, carrying knowledge that changed nothing and everything simultaneously. Holloway found Webb outside the briefing room after the morning operational update, catching the lieutenant before he could disappear into the rhythm of daily duties. "Sir," Holloway said, his voice lower than usual. "People are talking. About the medic. About what she did during the attack." Webb stopped walking. "What are they saying?" Holloway's jaw worked silently for a moment. That she was Special Forces. Delta or something similar. That she killed half the enemy force by herself. Webb studied the sergeant's face. "Does that change what she did?" Holloway blinked. "I do not understand the question, sir." Webb turned to face him fully. "You spent weeks treating Dr. Chun like she was beneath you, like she did not belong here, like her job made her less valuable than yours." He paused. "Now you know she has more combat experience than anyone on this base. Does that change how you see what happened?" Holloway opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I do not know what to think," he admitted. "Maybe that is the point, Sergeant." Webb's voice carried an edge that had not been there before. "We never thought about her at all. We just assumed she was less than us because of her job title. We never considered that someone might choose to be a medic after being something else. We never asked." Holloway stood in silence, unable to formulate a response. Webb walked away without waiting for one. Colonel Hayes summoned Chun to the command office at 1400 hours. The message gave no indication of the meeting's purpose, only the time and location. Chun arrived expecting discussion of the attack, perhaps questions about her actions for the official record. She had prepared careful answers that acknowledged her role without revealing details that would complicate her current assignment. Hayes closed the door behind her. "Have a seat, Master Sergeant." The rank landed like a physical blow. Chun had not heard those words directed at her in 3 years. She sat slowly, her face betraying nothing despite the sudden acceleration of her heartbeat. Hayes settled into her own chair across the desk. "I spoke with General Hawkins yesterday. He sends his regards. He also sends an offer." Chun waited. "JSOC has observed your actions during the attack with considerable interest. Your skills have clearly not degraded during your time in the Medical Corps. They are prepared to return you to operational status immediately if you choose to accept." The words hung in the air between them. A door Chun had closed 3 years ago suddenly reopened. "You have 72 hours to decide," Hayes continued. "Whatever you choose, you will have the full support of your command. This is not pressure, Doctor. This is an opportunity. What you do with it is entirely your decision." Chun sat motionless for a long moment. "Thank you, Colonel," she said finally. "I will consider the offer." She rose and left the office without further comment. The eastern perimeter looked different in daylight. The bodies had been removed, the brass casings collected, the blood absorbed into sand that had witnessed countless deaths across countless centuries. Nothing remained to mark what had happened except the memories of those who had been there. Chun walked the path she had taken during the attack, her footsteps tracing the route from the aid station to the breach point. She paused at each position where she had engaged a target, remembering the angle, the distance, the fraction of a second between trigger pull and impact. 17 positions. 17 lives ended by her hands. She had saved more than she had killed. The math was simple. 3 American soldiers dead, 14 wounded. Without her intervention, those numbers would have been far worse. The equation should have balanced in her favor. It never did. Chen stood at the breach point where she had found Holloway's squad pinned down, where she had eliminated 4 hostiles in as many seconds, where the sergeant who had mocked her for weeks had looked up to find his useless medic standing over him with a smoking rifle. She thought about the offer waiting on Hayes' desk. Delta Force. Operational status. A return to the life she had fled 3 years ago. She thought about Kowalski bleeding out in that Damascus alley, telling her to go while he held the corridor. She thought about the weight she carried and the weight she had just added. 72 hours to decide who she wanted to be. Chen turned and walked back toward the aid station, where wounded soldiers waited for a healer's hands instead of a killer's aim. Holloway found Chen in the aid station 2 days after the attack, standing in the doorway for nearly a minute before she acknowledged his presence. She was cataloging supplies, her hands moving through the familiar inventory with mechanical precision. Bandages, sutures, morphine auto-injectors. The same routine she had performed 100 times before, unchanged by everything that had changed. "Sergeant," she said without turning, "is there something you need?" Holloway stepped inside. The door swung shut behind him, leaving them alone in the antiseptic quiet. "Why did you never say anything?" he asked. Chen set down a roll of gauze. "Say anything about what?" "About who you are. What you were." Holloway's voice carried a rawness that surprised them both. "I spent weeks treating you like garbage, assigning you to clean toilets, mocking you in front of the entire unit. And you just took it. You never pushed back, never pulled rank, never mentioned that you had more combat experience than everyone on this base combined." Chen turned to face him. Her expression held neither anger nor satisfaction, only the steady calm that had defined her since her arrival. "Would it have mattered?" she asked. Holloway opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. The honest response sat in his chest like a stone he could not swallow. "I do not know," he admitted. Chen nodded slowly, as if this answer confirmed something she had already suspected. "Your opinion of me was never going to change based on words, Sergeant. You had decided what I was the moment you saw my insignia. Medical officer. Non-combatant. Someone beneath your notice." She paused. Nothing I said would have altered that perception. Only evidence could. Holloway stared at the floor. The evidence in question had been written in blood across the eastern perimeter. 17 bodies dropped by a woman he had dismissed as useless. "What am I supposed to do now?" he asked quietly. Chen returned to her inventory. "That is not my problem to solve." The words carried no cruelty, only fact. Holloway stood in the doorway for another moment, searching for something else to say, finding nothing. He turned and left the aid station without another word. Chen listened to his footsteps fade across the compound. She felt no triumph in the exchange. Holloway's reckoning was his own burden to carry. She had enough weight of her own. Lieutenant Webb arrived 30 minutes later, his knock hesitant despite his rank. "Dr. Chun," he said, "may I speak with you?" She gestured to the chair beside the examination table. Webb sat with the posture of a man preparing for confession. "I am submitting myself for formal counseling," he said. "Failure to address command climate issues within my platoon." Chen paused her work. "Is that necessary, Lieutenant?" Webb's hands clasped and unclasped in his lap. "I watched Sergeant Holloway harass a soldier under my command for weeks. I saw him assign you to inappropriate duties. I heard him mock you in front of the entire unit. And I did nothing. You cannot have known my background," Chen said. "That is not the point." Webb leaned forward, his young face lined with conviction that had not been there before the attack. "I did nothing because I assumed you could handle it. Because medics are supposed to be resilient. Because I told myself it was just Holloway being Holloway and you were tough enough to manage." He shook his head. "I was wrong. Not about your capability. About my responsibility. An officer's job is to protect every soldier in his command, regardless of whether they seem to need protection. I failed that obligation." Chun studied him for a long moment. The lieutenant who had looked away while Holloway bullied her had transformed into someone willing to sacrifice his own record to acknowledge that failure. "I appreciate you telling me this," she said. Webb rose to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Dr. Chun, I am glad you were here. All of us are." He He departed before she could respond. Torres completed the after-action review that afternoon, 2 documents representing 2 versions of the same truth. The official record described coordinated base defense against a numerically superior enemy force. It credited responding personnel with eliminating threats to the eastern sector. It recommended commendations for several soldiers who had distinguished themselves during the engagement. It made no mention of individual kill counts or specific tactical actions. The classified record documented everything. Chen's movement from the aid station, her engagement sequence, her 17 confirmed kills, her tactical proficiency and operational decision-making. Torres recommended recognition through appropriate JSOC channels, noting that Master Sergeant Chen's actions had prevented the Eastern Breach from becoming a catastrophic failure. Colonel Hayes reviewed both documents and approved them without modification. The truth would exist in 2 forms. One for history, one for those who needed to know. Evening formation assembled at 1800 hours. The entire base gathered in ranks as the sun descended toward the horizon. Colonel Hayes stood before them, her uniform pressed, her bearing commanding attention without demanding it. She spoke first of the attack, the timeline, the casualties, the soldiers who had given their lives defending forward operating base Redstone. 3 names read aloud into the desert silence. Then she spoke of the defense. What happened 3 nights ago demonstrated something important, Hayes said. Capability exists in unexpected places. The people we overlook may carry skills we never imagined. The assumptions we make about who belongs where can be dangerously wrong. Her gaze swept across the assembled soldiers without settling on anyone in particular. Every person on this base serves a vital function. Medical personnel, support staff, infantry, intelligence. Each role requires training, dedication, and courage. None is inherently superior to another. She paused. I expect every soldier under my command to remember that lesson. Dismissed. The formation broke apart in the gathering dusk. Soldiers drifted toward the dining facility, toward their quarters, toward the quiet corners where they processed what they had witnessed and what it meant. Hayes found Chun standing apart from the dispersing crowd, watching the sunset paint the perimeter in shades of orange and gold. Dr. Chun, Hayes said, have you reached a decision? Chun did not turn. I have, Colonel. Hayes waited. I spent 3 years trying to become someone who heals instead of someone who kills. Chen's voice was steady, contemplative. One night of violence does not erase that work. It does not change what I want to be. You are declining Sock's offer, Hayes said. I am. Chen finally turned to face her commander. But I want them to know something. If my skills are ever needed again, truly needed, I will be ready. The warrior does not disappear because I choose to be a healer. She just waits. Hayes nodded slowly. I will convey that message. She walked back toward the command post, leaving Chun alone with the fading light. The decision had been made. The path forward was clear. Sarah Chun would remain a medic. She would continue saving lives instead of taking them. She would carry the weight of 47 kills plus 17 more, and she would balance that debt 1 patient at a time. The warrior would wait. The healer would work. And if the base ever needed her other skills again, she would be ready to pay whatever price the moment demanded. The administrative office occupied a small room adjacent to the command post, furnished with a metal desk, 2 chairs, and a filing cabinet that contained the official records of every soldier who had served at Forward Operating Base Redstone. Major Christine Delacroix sat behind the desk, Holloway's service record open before her. Sergeant First Class Holloway, she said, reading from the formal counseling statement. You are receiving this entry for failure to maintain professional standards in your interactions with fellow soldiers. Specifically, conduct unbecoming toward Dr. Sarah Chun over a period of approximately 3 weeks, including inappropriate duty assignments and public disparagement. Holloway sat at attention, his eyes fixed on a point above Delacroix's head. Yes, ma'am. Delacroix studied him. This entry will remain in your permanent record. It may impact future promotion considerations. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. She set down the document. Do you have anything to say before we conclude? Holloway was silent for a long moment. The question invited excuse, justification, the kind of self-serving explanation that might soften the consequences. He found he had no appetite for any of it. I learned something important about judging people, he said finally. I will not make the same mistake again. Delacroix made a note on the counseling form. His acceptance of responsibility, offered without deflection or complaint. It was more than most soldiers managed when facing formal reprimand. Dismissed, Sergeant, she said. Holloway rose, saluted, and walked out into the afternoon sun. The weight of the counseling statement settled into his service record like a stone dropped into still water. He would carry it for the rest of his career. He found he did not mind as much as he expected. Rivera submitted her request for extended mentorship through official channels the following morning. The paperwork cited professional development goals and trauma medicine certification as primary objectives. What it did not mention was the real reason she wanted to continue learning for Dr. Chun. Chun approved the request without comment. Their first official session convened in the aid station at 1,400 hours, Rivera arriving with notebooks and questions prepared. Chun walked her through advanced wound assessment techniques, her hands demonstrating procedures that Rivera practiced on simulation dummies. An hour passed before Rivera found the courage to ask what she really wanted to know. Dr. Chun, she said, her hands pausing on a practice suture. Do you regret any of it? The years in Delta, the kills, the cost you described. Chun continued demonstrating the next technique, her fingers never faltering despite the weight of the question. I regret that it was necessary, she said. Wars happen because diplomacy fails. People like me exist because sometimes violence is the only remaining option. I wish we lived in a world where my skills were never needed. Her hands completed the suture with practiced precision. But I do not regret doing what needed to be done. Every mission I completed, every target I eliminated, served a purpose larger than myself. I protected people who could not protect themselves. I removed threats that would have caused far greater harm if left unchecked. She met Rivera's eyes. The cost is real. I carry it every day. But carrying a burden is different from regretting the choice that created it. I made my choices with full awareness of what they would cost. I will make most of them again. Rivera absorbed this in silence. The distinction between regret and acceptance felt important in ways she could not quite articulate. She returned to her practice sutures, learning medicine from a woman who had spent a decade mastering death. Captain Torres packed his belongings the morning of his scheduled departure, his after-action review complete and filed through appropriate channels. The helicopter that would carry him to regional command was due in 2 hours. He found Chun near the base entrance, watching a supply convoy prepare for departure. Dr. Chun, he said, I wanted to speak with you before I left. She turned to face him, her expression carrying the same unreadable calm he had observed since his arrival. Your classified file will reflect your actions during the attack, Torres said. Full commendation for exceptional valor under fire. 17 confirmed kills in defense of friendly forces. Recommendation for recognition through JSOC channels. She nodded once. Thank you, Captain. Torres hesitated. Is the least the record should reflect. We did save this base. The official documentation should acknowledge that, even if most people will never see it. Chun looked toward the horizon, where heat shimmer distorted the distant mountains. The record that matters is not on paper, Captain. Torres understood what she meant. The soldiers she had saved would remember. The families who would welcome those soldiers home would never know her name, but they would have their loved ones because of what she had done. That was the record that counted. Safe travels, Dr. Chun, he said. He walked toward the helicopter pad without looking back. The message arrived through unofficial channels 3 days later, routed through a network of contacts that existed outside formal military communications. A Delta operator at Fort Bragg had heard rumors about a medic at Forward Operating Base Redstone who had single-handedly broken an enemy assault. The details matched someone he had served with years ago. Chin read the message in the communications tent, the words glowing on the screen before her. Tell Mad Dog the family says hello. We heard what happened. Glad to know you still have it. The door is always open if you ever want to come home. Either way, we are proud of you. Signed, your brothers and sisters in the unit. Chun stared at the screen for a long time. Mad Dog. She had not heard that call sign since Damascus. The operator she had served with, the family she had left behind, still remembered her, still claimed her as one of their own despite her departure. A smile crossed her face. Small, fleeting, but genuine. The first smile since the night she had picked up a rifle and become someone she thought she had left behind. She typed a brief reply. Tell the Mad Dog, receive the message. She is exactly where she needs to be, but she appreciates knowing the family remembers. She sent the message and logged off, carrying warmth she had not expected to feel. Colonel Hayes summoned Chun to the command office 1 week after the attack. The conversation was brief. JSOC has approved recognition for your actions, Hayes said. The Silver Star your second. The ceremony will be conducted through classified channels at a location to be determined. Chun absorbed this without visible reaction. With respect, Colonel, I would prefer to skip the ceremony entirely. Hayes shook her head. That is not how it works, Doctor. Recognition matters. Not for your sake, but for the record. Future operators need to know that service is acknowledged, even when it occurs outside official channels. Chun considered arguing further, then decided against it. It was worth asking, she said. Hayes almost smiled. It always is. Dismissed, Doctor. Chun left the command office with a second Silver Star incoming and no desire to stand on a stage while someone pinned metal to her chest. The recognition felt hollow compared to the weight of what she had done to earn it. 17 more names added to the list she carried. 17 more faces she would see when sleep finally came. The medal would go in a drawer somewhere, alongside the first Silver Star and the Distinguished Service Cross and all the other decorations that measured her value in bodies dropped rather than lives saved. She walked toward the aid station, where patients waited for a doctor's hands instead of a killer's aim. That was the recognition that mattered. That was the record she cared about. Everything else was just metal and ribbon and words spoken over graves. 3 weeks passed, and forward operating base Redstone settled into a rhythm that resembled normalcy. The eastern perimeter had been reinforced with additional barriers and improved sight lines. The guard rotation had been restructured to eliminate the vulnerabilities Chun had identified before the attack. Life continued in the space between what had happened and what might come next. Chun stood in the aid station treating Private Okonkwo for a minor infection, her manner unchanged from the weeks before the assault. The same methodical examination, the same calm instructions, the same quiet competence that had defined her since her arrival. Rivera observed from across the room, preparing supplies for the afternoon's sick call appointments. She watched her mentor work and saw both versions of the woman simultaneously. The healer whose hands moved with gentle precision. The warrior who had killed 17 enemies without hesitation. Both existed in the same body, separated only by circumstance and choice. Keep the wound clean and dry, Chun told Okonkwo. Change the dressing twice daily. Return in 3 days for follow-up. Okonkwo nodded, his eyes carrying something they had not held before the attack. Respect, certainly, but also something deeper. The awareness that the woman treating his minor infection had saved his life and the lives of his squad, mates through skills she had hidden until the moment they were needed. Thank you, Dr. Chun, he said. The words carried weight beyond their simple meaning. Chun acknowledged them with a nod and moved to the next patient. Lieutenant Webb walked the perimeter during morning patrol, his boots tracing the same path he had walked dozens of times before. The eastern sector looked different now. Not because of the physical changes, the new barriers and adjusted positions, but because of what he knew had happened there. He paused at the spot where Holloway's squad had been pinned down. The ground showed no evidence of the firefight. Sand had absorbed the blood. Wind had scattered the debris. But Webb could see it clearly in his memory. The muzzle flashes, the screaming, the desperate radio calls for reinforcement that no one could provide. And then Chun, emerging from the smoke like something out of legend, her rifle rising and falling with mechanical precision as she eliminated every threat between herself and the trapped soldiers. Webbett spent weeks failing to notice her, failing to protect her from harassment, failing to see past the insignia on her uniform to the person beneath. That failure would stay with him for the rest of his career, a lesson written in the lives she had saved while he stood paralyzed by assumptions. He resumed his patrol with a new habit forming in his mind, looking at every soldier differently now, wondering what capabilities might exist beneath surfaces he had never thought to examine. The dining facility hummed with the lunch crowd when Holloway approached Chen's table. She sat alone as she often did, eating with the efficient focus of someone who viewed meals as fuel rather than social opportunity. Holloway stood beside her table, his tray in his hands. "May I sit?" he asked. Chen looked up. Her expression offered neither welcome nor rejection. She gestured to the empty seat across from her. Holloway sat. For a long moment, neither spoke. The noise of the dining facility filled the silence between them. "I want to learn the tourniquet technique you used during the attack," Holloway said finally. "The one that saved Morrison." His hands adjusted the items on his tray without purpose. "My training covered the basics, but what you did was different. More effective." Chen studied him. The sergeant who had mocked her for weeks, assigned her to clean toilets, knocked her medical bag into the mud, was now asking her to teach him. She could have refused. She could have reminded him of every insult, every humiliation, every moment he had used his authority to diminish her. The opportunity for righteous rejection sat before her like a gift. Instead, she nodded. "I have time after 1,400 hours," she said. "Meet me at the aid station." It was not forgiveness. Forgiveness required an apology that Holloway had not offered and might never find the words to give. But it was a door that had not existed before, a possibility where only walls had stood. Holloway nodded once and began eating. They finished their meals in silence, two people who had been enemies discovering they might become something else. Now I want to ask you something before we finish this story. Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone revealed capabilities that nobody expected them to have? Maybe at work, maybe in your family, maybe in yourself. Drop your answer in the comments and let me know if this story resonated with something in your own experience. And if you want to see more stories like this one, make sure you subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Night settled over forward operating base Redstone with a gradual dimming that preceded full darkness. Chen sat on her bunk with her journal open, the pages illuminated by a small reading light clipped to the headboard. She wrote about the past 3 weeks, the routine that had returned, the patients she had treated, the training session with Holloway, which had been awkward but productive, the ongoing mentorship with Rivera, who asked fewer questions now, but listened more carefully to the answers. Then her pen slowed, and she wrote about something older. Kowalski would laugh at me. She could almost hear his voice, the gravel tone that years of cigarettes and combat had produced. The unit's deadliest sniper becoming a medic. He would find it hilarious, but he would understand why. He always understood the weight we carried. He felt it too, every mission, every trigger pull, every face that visited him in dreams. We talked about it once, in a safe house in Kandahar, both of us unable to sleep. He said the job required becoming someone you would not recognize in a mirror. The skill was remembering how to become yourself again when the mission ended. I forgot how to do that. After Damascus, after watching him die in that alley while I held the corridor, I could not find my way back to whoever I had been before, Delta. So I became someone new instead. A healer instead of killer. A doctor instead of an operator. The attack tested that choice. 17 more kills added to the 47 I already carried. 17 more faces for the dreams that still come despite the medication and the therapy and the years of distance. But I made peace with it. Some debts are worth paying. Kowalski taught me that too, in the last words he ever spoke. "Go," he said. "Save the ones you can. Do not waste time on the ones you cannot." I saved them. The soldiers in the aid station. Holloway squad. Everyone who would have died if I had kept my promise to never fire another shot. The debt increased. The balance shifted, but the account did not close. I am exactly where I need to be. Healer by choice. Warrior when necessary. Both versions of myself existing in the same body, waiting for circumstance to determine which one the world requires. Kowalski would understand. I hope wherever he is, he knows I am still saving the ones I can. Chun closed the journal and extinguished the reading light. Outside her window, the perimeter guards changed shifts, their footsteps marking the rhythm of safety maintained through vigilance. She lay back on her bunk and stared at the ceiling. Feeling the weight, she carried Settle into its familiar position. 64 confirmed kills now. 64 faces. 64 debts that could never be fully repaid. But tomorrow she would wake and walk to the aid station. She would treat patients and train Rivera and continue becoming the person she had chosen to be. The warrior would wait in silence, ready if needed, patient if not. Sarah Chun closed her eyes. For the first time since the attack, sleep came without resistance. She dreamed of nothing at all.